Please listen carefully.
Hey everyone, welcome to the 11th episode of the Study Space podcast, a show dedicated to helping students like you earn better grades, navigate your college journey, and become lifelong learners. My name is David, content strategist at Uniplan.
And my name is Julian, the founder and lead software engineer at Uniplan.
Today we'll be talking about how to get into the flow and what that means for your productivity. But before we start, I have to ask, Julian, what's inspiring you today?
What is inspiring me today has to do a little bit with what we're going to be talking about today. So what I'm going to say is going to give a hint into the specifics of what we're going to be talking about. And what is specifically inspiring me today is the fact that I chose to work from home today instead of going into the office. And that's inspiring me today because working from home is a different environment than my office. It lends itself to have, let's say, a different set of distractions. I don't want to say it's completely distraction free because I have two dogs and I live with two dogs. And, I can't really have much time to myself without their barking or trying to vie for my attention. So I'm still distracted at home, but again, it's a different set of distractions than the distractions that I have at work. I've got work friends, I've got other people walking up to ask questions, and like pop-up meetings and such like. Or like I overhear a conversation that happens down the hall, and I feel like I got to join in and such like. And so it's a different set of distractions. And I wanted to try it out today because, LA traffic is terrible, first of all. I drive like 20 minutes to get to work, which is pretty good for LA standards, but the killer is the drive home. Driving home is like 50 minutes. So it more than doubles during the evening, whereas in the morning when I come in, it's like 20 minutes, which is really good. And I didn't want to go through that today. And so I decided to work from home for the day. And that change of environment actually allowed me to be very, very productive, despite, working from home, which some might think is a bad thing or like an excuse to not do anything. But I actually was very, very productive today. So that is what's inspiring me today.
That's awesome. Yeah, I would love to work from home, obviously, especially like you have dogs, right? And I think especially like if you have kids, I know it's a lot of people have talked about how it's like beneficial for you to work at home because then you can keep an eye on your kids and actually like play a more active role in their lives, in addition to, doing your work. And that works out for a lot of people, especially like, let's say working moms or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Yep.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I know in the computer science program at Georgia Tech, right. A lot of people talk about working from home, like on our Slack channel and like on the online masters in computer science Slack channel. A lot of people talk about working from home and how that's great for their families and stuff. And it allows them to like it gives them more time that they can spend on the program or on their family, not having to commute, right. And that's great. You just take that time back that you would otherwise be wasting on the road, especially in LA where it's like, like all you're doing is just sitting there. It's, to reclaim that time feels really good.
Right. Yeah. I think that's kind of a new thing too. Ever since the advent of computer science and a lot of stuff, like I think digital marketing, a lot of people work from home and those sort of that work that can be done remotely, as opposed to like more physical, like I guess jobs where you need to be there, like for example customer service. Obviously you need to be there to do your job,
right?
And stuff like that. And that's something that's really great about technology, I think.
Yeah, what's funny is that I don't understand why this trend is not like a bigger thing. Like I know that workplaces are moving more towards working from home because they're seeing the benefits in their employees. Like their employees are equally productive, if not more productive, when they work at home, and it saves them time from having to travel to and from the office. And so that like makes morale better, because people don't have to wake up like really early or stay really late, you know, and such like. So the workforce is happier. They get to be like comfortable in their own environment, which feels good. And even if it's like just one day in the week, like it doesn't have to be like fully remote, or like, you know, a couple days out of the week, right? That's
Right.
good. And I don't understand why it's not a bigger trend, because if we think about like another office trend where it's like an open office where it's just like one big long table and everybody is just sits together in one big long table, and really your only division is like, I don't know, maybe a panel on the table that separates your workspace, or like another chair, I guess. And honestly, I don't think that is conducive to productivity at all. But
Right.
really, if you really think about it, the open office concept is all to like save money on office facilities, you know, because you end up taking less space in the office, and so you can fit more people in the office, or you can opt for a smaller office and fit the same amount of people, because it's, you know, you take up less space, so it's cheaper for the company overall to opt for an open office style. But when you think about working from home, those people literally aren't in the office. So really, you don't even need to have that big of an office space. So that's like money saved for the company. So I don't understand, like if you're thinking about it from a cost perspective, I think it just makes total sense, right? I mean, we work 100% remotely, but that's probably because we're like geographically split 3 ways, you know, but still,
Right,
like we still
definitely.
get work done, right? And so that's the important part.
Right, yeah. So I guess what's inspiring me today is something pretty interesting. So this weekend I was at Rocketry, and we were working on, you know, some electronic stuff, and working on programming and everything for the rocket. And our avionics team lead, who is actually a freshman, he took over the position just recently, after our previous avionics team lead stepped down. He was able to take over the position, and he'd been doing really, really well for the last few months, like showing great promise. Like out of all the freshmen, he's working like 2-3 times harder than everybody else, putting in the hours.
Wow.
And he's definitely very knowledgeable. Yeah, no, when that was my first impression of him when I came in, I was like, whoa, this guy knows like everything. And so I learned a lot of stuff from him. I didn't know anything about PCB design, which is printed circuit board design, before I came into rocketry. And he was able to really coach me through that process, mentor me, and I was like, whoa, this is really like, this kid, even though we're in the same grade level, he knows so much more than I do. And I was just willing to, you know, kind of feed off that. And so now I'd say I'm relatively okay at PCB design, like definitely more experienced than I was before. But he, like, we were just talking about internships, you know, just like non-work related banter, and then he brought up the fact that he doesn't think he's qualified for any hardware positions, because he said, before I even joined this club, I didn't know anything about electronics. And I was just like taken back a little bit. I was like, wait, are you serious? And he said, yeah, like I was a software guy before college. I only did software in high school, so I was pretty nervous joining avionics and having to do all this electronic stuff.
Huh.
And I guess that really goes to show you, yeah, like even the guy that you think is the most qualified probably doesn't think he's qualified at all, or maybe he like, and that, I think the only difference between me and him, I guess, is that he really took the time to learn, you know, outside of the club, really learn on his own, and kind of, I guess, develop the skill. And he didn't need any resources at all. Like from what I can tell, it was just from maybe books and YouTube and online resources. Like I don't think anybody else in the club knew that much about electronics. So just in like the short span of a few weeks, he was able to gain more knowledge than like all the rest of us. So I guess that inspires me, because it shows really like how much you can do when you really put your mind to something and just dedicate to it for a period of time. Even if
Yeah.
that period of time is not that long, you can gain so much over people who've been doing this stuff for maybe even years, right?
Right.
I mean, I came into college with some electronics experience, I'd say. Definitely not a lot, but he was able to just like close that gap and then overtake me like really, really quickly. It's kind of surprising, really, really surprising.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show how much imposter syndrome affects your perception of your own skills, right? Like people, and I don't know what imposter syndrome is like for other fields, but I feel like my impression is that in engineering in particular, imposter syndrome is like a huge problem because we always like look towards like our left and our right and we see these people and we're like, oh my God, they're so much smarter than I am, or they know so much more than I do, when the reality is that your skills and another person's skills are like, there's actually very little overlap. If you like truly think and compare about your skills and qualifications, there's actually only a tiny bit of overlap. And the reason why you perceive their knowledge base to be greater than yours, it's because they just know different stuff. It's not necessarily that they know more than you, it's that they know different material from what you know.
Right.
So that's like a really big thing. And I think like the fact that he was like, oh, like, yeah, you know, I don't feel qualified with this at all is like a show of imposter syndrome right there, because you perceive him to be like very, very adequate, very, you know, really fit for the role. And then you also are like, oh, wow, like he knows so much more than I do. And that I think also has some degree of imposter syndrome as well. So,
right,
you know, that's a huge problem in tech and in engineering. It's just kind of a big issue that we need to tackle more, honestly.
Right, definitely. I definitely agree with you there. I think it's just because our field specifically are very, very skill based, and so when we're like looking for an internship or looking for a job, or just, you know, we're in the job or the internship, I feel like the reason why we feel that imposter syndrome is because of I guess a perceived like skill gap. That's what it is. Whereas in other fields that might not be so prominent. I think it's especially prominent in these fields. And the thing about it is I think that it really discourages you from pursuing new opportunities when you do that. And so I guess my advice for getting over that is really just to hit those opportunities as hard as you can. And even if you don't feel like you're qualified for them, I guess fake it till you make it. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying like to lie on your internship application. Just say, you know, just be honest and say what your skills are. And who knows, like maybe they will actually accept you, and you might feel underqualified, but you'll go there and you'll learn the skills. And by the end, you'll probably be as qualified as anybody else who started in the program with more experience than you were.
Yeah. I think I think part of it is an identity issue, right? You don't identify as that individual, or you don't identify as somebody being skilled in a particular field. Like there are people who literally have college degrees, like who have spent 3, 4, 5 years learning a specific field of study and feel like they know nothing, which doesn't make any sense. When you really think about it, like you literally spent that many years in school and you feel as though you've learned nothing. That cannot be. Right. So I think it's an identity issue. Part of it, at least, is an identity issue. You just don't identify with that persona, you know, a person that has expertise in a certain field. You don't feel that way. You don't see yourself in that light. And that's a problem. We need to change that.
Okay. Well, I guess it's time to start the meat of the podcast.
Yep.
So our episode today is about how to get into the flow. And I guess when we're referring to the flow, we're referring to kind of a state that you're in when you're studying or trying to get work done, where you're really, really efficient. And it's for, you know, an extended period of time. And I think an important thing about the flow is that you don't feel the need to stop, right? A lot of the times when you're doing work, you're like, oh, you know, I didn't have a break from this, right? And the flow is a state where you're like, oh, I could just do this forever. And I think obviously like that's a state that everybody wants to get into, because it just seems like, you know, you're getting so much done during that time. But I guess people find it really hard to do that. And so this episode is dedicated to helping you giving you advice and techniques on how to get into that flow and how to really improve your studying.
So I feel like everybody has had an experience where they've been in like a flow state, like they've been super focused and super concentrated on one task. So why don't you talk about some experiences that you've had where you've been in the flow state and what that felt like?
Yeah, actually, I mean, the most recent example I can think of is yesterday. So we were having a little lab meeting for my research, and then my PI asked me if I could just drop a quick schematic. Well, not really quick, but like if I could redraw a schematic that he had earlier onto a different software, because we needed it to be updated, and he wanted me to take full control over it. And so I was like, yeah. And I just got into this state where I was like really, really enjoying the process. I was just like, well, obviously I'm going to get into a little bit of technical terms here, but I was like going into data sheets and extracting the information, and I was like reading up on all this stuff and figuring out how the parts work together, and how, where all the inputs are going to be, where all the outputs are going to be, how everything's going to communicate with each other. And I was just doing all this research, and I was like putting all the parts together and drawing it up. And during this time, I wasn't even perceiving like how fast time was going by. It was supposed to be like a 1 to 2 hour meeting, and I ended up staying there for 3 hours because I didn't even like realize like my PI left like at 5, because that's when all the like PhDs and all the workers, the general workers at the lab usually leave, and I was just there by myself. I was like, oh my god, it's like 6. I need to get dinner. And it was pretty crazy. I was really, really enjoying it. And I guess that's like a really good example of the flow for me. There was a time, I believe, like it was close to final season, and it was like we were working on some problem sets for physics, and I had, like, I'd say pretty much the same experience. I was just going into the physics homework. I was like, all right, I'm gonna knock out this whole problem set by today, and I just went into it, and I was just going in, solving every problem like it was nothing. And then I was like, whoa, I actually finished that. And it's really crazy when you think about it, because I didn't even feel like I was struggling. So I guess that brings up 2 points, right? One is that I think you have to enjoy the thing you're doing to get into a flow state. I'm not like, I don't think I've personally ever been in a flow state when I haven't enjoyed doing something. Maybe you can bring up a counterpoint to that, Julian. But for me personally, everything that I've gotten into a flow state for, I really, really enjoy. Or at least like I really try to enjoy it. Like physics, I don't necessarily enjoy too much, but that specific unit I was like really intense on, because I was like, oh, this is like really cool.
I don't know if this technically counts as the flow state. I think it does. But you were saying that like you don't know if there's if it's possible to like be in a flow state when you're doing something you don't like. I think that when I am under intense pressure, like say from a very close deadline, I think that tends to push me towards the flow state easier. Like I'll be like, right, oh my God, I have a project due tomorrow and I haven't started, kind of a deadline. And you do it, and you just crank out whatever you need to do in whatever amount of time that you can have to do that project. Right. And I think that is flow state, because I don't know if you lose track of time. I think I definitely do feel as though I lose track of time. Like that's an important aspect of like the flow state, is that you lose track of how much time you're spending on that work.
Right.
But when you're like in pressure, like it's like a deadline that's like in a couple of hours, your eye is like on the clock all the time, right? But you're also like very rushed, very fast, very efficient, to be quite frank, when you're under that much pressure, and you just get things done. It might not be like, of exceptional quality. However, some of my best writing has come out of last minute essays, but still, like you're cranking out that work, and it feels good. Obviously you hate it because it's not a fun thing to do. Some of the things that you do in school aren't the most enjoyable, but you crank it out nonetheless. And I think that's flow state right there, is when you're under pressure.
I mean, yeah, I can definitely agree with you there. I think pressure also does bring on the flow state, but I think the difference is, at least for me, um, when I'm in a flow state because of passion and excitement rather than pressure, I actually enjoy it more. And although I do feel accomplished at the end of both, I definitely enjoy the process a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm like actually passionate about something. And I mean, this schematic wasn't due for like I literally told him. He asked me if 1 week was enough to do it, and I told him I probably need two, and then I finished the entire thing like yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty. I guess it's like a testament to how how important, like, or how big of an impact enjoyment and passion can make when you're
Yeah.
doing something in regards to flow state.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
deny that. Like when you like what you're
Right.
doing, the quality of work is higher. The rate at which you do that work is greater. But just saying, flow state when you're doing something that you don't like is possible. And
Right.
that
No,
instance for
definitely.
me is being under a great deal of pressure from like a really close deadline.
No, I can definitely see that, and I think I've probably experienced that a few times, although I just don't think of it as, you know, the flow state. But I'm sure, yeah, there have been probably a few essays where I felt really, really happy at the end of them. I was like, "Ooh, I'm glad I got that done." And for the most part, I actually didn't do too poorly on those. Don't know what your experiences were like with that, but deadlines certainly get me going.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the second point that I had there was that it seemed easy for me when I was getting into this flow state. And so I think you can, I don't know what your perspective on this is, but I've only really been able to get into a flow state and get work done when I've had like no intellectual interruptions, I guess you could say, in the sense that like I didn't really need to think super hard and I wasn't like super quote unquote stuck on a problem, right? Because I think that is often what causes me to break my flow state. So like I know a lot of the times like when I'm stuck on a math problem, I'll go and just like, oh, you know, whatever, I'll solve this later. And then I end up going on my phone and then I'll go back to the math one, like realizing that I need to do it, and I'll totally forget where I am and I'll go to the problem like, oh, I don't really know how to solve this. And then it goes to more procrastination, right? And so I'll end up procrastinating that problem for a while before I end up figuring it out, you know, by asking for help or just like looking it up online, or using some online resources, or reading the book again.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? I think you're right. I think when you hit like a mental wall, like when you're
It's hard. Right.
it is hard. It is hard. But I mean back to like the being under a great deal of pressure point. Like I had a project due I think last week for my computer networks class, and I didn't get the algorithm, like period. I didn't understand the algorithm at all. And I looked at that problem and I was like, nope, can't do it. Not in one sitting. So I'm probably not going to start now. And then, I mean, I guess I still finished it like a week in advance because the project was released 2 weeks in advance, and I got it done 1 week in. So that's I guess is a good thing. But still, like I had put off working on it immediately because I've gotten into the habit of starting things pretty early. Like university has taught me, or in university I built up that really good habit of like starting right away or starting at least as soon as possible.
Right.
And I didn't do that with this project because I looked at the algorithm and I was like, yeah, I can't do that. Sorry, I'm gonna do something else that's easier for a while before I feel comfortable enough to even attempt that. But however, after you sort of eclipse that like first mental wall, figuring out the problem and learning how to solve it almost becomes like a task by itself, and I get into the flow state for that.
Interesting.
And then that allows me to solve the larger problem, which is to figure out the algorithm that I need to implement. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if I articulated that well, but I feel like when I have, I mean, something like a math problem is, I guess, too small in scope for you to enter the flow state to be able to like learn how to solve that problem. But
Right.
in the perspective of like a larger project and you hit like a roadblock, right? Sometimes for me, I feel like that one roadblock and figuring out that roadblock becomes a task where I apply or I enter the flow state in order to figure out how to solve that roadblock.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah. I get that.
I think where I struggle though with this is when a particular topic has many roadblocks in quick succession. Like I solve one issue and then my very next step is a struggle. And then I solve that issue and then the very next step is a struggle. When that happens, my willpower breaks down very fast because I'm just like, man, like I really don't know how to solve this when every single step is a struggle, you know? So I think that's
Right, definitely.
that's where I struggle with this. But like I said, it's like when I hit a mental wall, I agree. Entering the flow state is hard, but after a while, that obstacle becomes a flow state task on its own. And then that helps me solve the larger problem.
Right, definitely. I can definitely see where that applies. Maybe I'm just not as motivated as you because I definitely have had so many incidents where I just like encounter one big roadblock. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. And yeah, that certainly caused a lot of problems for me.
I think it's just a matter of like mental stamina.
Yeah.
You know, you gotta really push through.
Yeah. Right, breaking it down is super important too, I think, when it comes to the flow state. Just breaking everything, like a huge obstacle, like you said, it down into little small subtasks. I think that really helps, just figuring something out. Because then I think you can more closely identify like what's actually blocking you, and then you can work on that one specific area. Yeah, but like I was mentioning earlier, I think it really is important to be prepared before you go into the flow state. I think it really helps. Obviously, like we mentioned, it's impossible to be 100% prepared, and there are just going to be some roadblocks that you were just not ready for. But I think before you work on a task, like let's say for instance, like actually doing your homework, I think it's a good idea to review your notes and to review the book a little bit before you go into that, so that you actually know what kind of problems you're going to be tackling. Maybe look at some processes, like some example problems on how to tackle those, and then I think just really making sure that you have an idea of what you're getting yourself into. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of challenges. Professors like modifying problems slightly that make it 10 times harder.
Yep.
But that's definitely going to be something that you're working on in the homework. But then I guess if the homework was like super easy anyway, then there wouldn't be a point in assigning it, right? The professor actually wants you to learn and to figure out stuff and to really practice doing homework. I know I didn't have that problem in high school because I feel like a lot of my homework was super brain dead in the sense that like they were just assigning it to us because it was busy work and they really wanted us to master it and not make dumb mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But in college, dumb mistakes still exist, but what the professors are looking for now is that you don't make huge conceptual mistakes and you actually understand stuff conceptually. That's why they don't have numbers on the test. That's why they don't have a lot of these little small things. They don't really care about the little small things that the high school teachers did. Like I know I got like the answer wrong for was one test, but I still got 100% of the problem because my entire process was correct and my setup was correct. I just forgot to add like 1/2 or something throughout the process. And the same goes for homework, I think, a lot of the times. It depends on your professor, obviously. But yeah, those big conceptual questions are what they're going to be looking for. And the best way you can prepare yourself for that is to get kind of a theoretical understanding, just using the book and using your notes.
Yeah. So I guess that leads into a book that I read and that I recommend to almost everybody as sort of like a book on how to work and how to work efficiently. Like if some people are having trouble with like, they feel like they're busy, but they're not really getting much done. Like that doesn't make any sense. Like how can I feel busy all the time, but like not actually get anything done? This is the book that I recommend everybody read. And it is Cal Newport's Deep Work. Cal Newport is the author. Deep Work is the title of the book. Cal Newport is a computer science professor at MIT. I think it's MIT. Let me do a quick Google here. Cal Newport. Oh, no. His education's in MIT. Okay, where is he working? MIT. Yes, MIT. Okay, cool. Oh, wait. Georgetown University. Just kidding. Yeah, he's doing Georgetown University. He's a computer science professor, which is great because he's in my field. But he did author a number of books on like how to be a student, how to work efficiently, deep work, right? And such like, and a bunch of other things. He has a blog as well where he talks about some of these things, and it's super, super amazing content. You should check him out. But his book on deep work, I think, is one of the seminal works in like the personal productivity space. Like it's a very popular name when you've been in the personal productivity space a while. Like even if you do like like just a tiny bit of reading on personal productivity, like how to improve it, you'll come across deep work pretty fast. And I'd like to give like a summary as to like a very broad summary in that book. I still recommend that everybody read it though, to glean over the details and the stories in that book and his examples and such like. And it's a very good book. But essentially in that book, Cal Newport talks about how not all work is equally valuable. You can do work that is important, or work that is that will move you forward, or you can do work that doesn't really get you anywhere, that doesn't really improve your skills, that doesn't really move the needle forward, that doesn't allow you to grow, right?
Right.
And those are the two kinds of work. He sort of classifies it as like, he classifies it as, quote, shallow work and deep work, the title of the book. Shallow work is sort of tasks that you do like email or Slack messages or like doing the laundry or washing dishes, right? Like those are things that you need to do, or that needs to be done. I don't know if you absolutely need to do them, but they need to be done at some point and by someone. Whether it's you is up to interpretation. And then there's work that is truly important to your job or your personal growth or your career or whatever it is that you hold important in whatever you hold as important. That work is deep work. It's work that moves the needle forward. And deep work is also a state, like the flow state, right? Flow state and deep work are sort of synonymous in Cal Newport's eyes. And getting into the flow state is the hard part. Once you get into the flow state, the work just sort of happens. And that's the great part about the flow state, is that when you get into the flow state, you don't really notice it happening. You're just sort of in the moment and you lose all track of time and you're just cranking out work. That's the flow state. There's no really like hard point where I can say like, oh, I'm in the flow state right now. And then the most devastating thing that can happen is when you get interrupted in a flow state. Like when you just break out of that like spur of focus and concentration, and then you turn your head back down to the task and it's like, wow, I lost it. Like I don't have it anymore. And that's the most frustrating feeling in the world. And he goes over all of this in his book. I recommend that you read it. But before moving on, I would like to ask, what is your experience with the idea that not all work is created equal, or not all work is equally valuable?
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with that. No, I don't know. There's an online entrepreneur out there. His name is Dan Locke, and you can, I don't know, like the rest of the products that he sells and the rest of the stuff he does, I don't want to speak about that. But he said something interesting, and it's he said, you know that guy next to you who's getting 10 times more done than you are? He's not 10 times smarter than you. He's not working 10 times harder than you because, you know, you only have 24 hours in a day. That's just not possible. He said he's doing more than you. He's getting more done than you because he is basically able to put himself in a position where his work is more valuable, if that makes sense. So like it goes back to the saying, like, if you know, you can dig a hole, right? Like you can be told to dig a hole, and you have two options. You can use a spoon to dig that hole and you'll take forever, or you can actually use like a machine, right? Or perhaps a shovel, right? To dig that hole more quickly. And so it goes back to that. And I think that's the difference between work, if that makes any sense at all. Right? It's not necessarily about your effort into it. It's about the tools you're using. And I think a flow state is an example of, I guess, your mastery of that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Getting into the flow state is definitely something that you can train, that you can practice, and it gets easier. It's like a muscle almost. Like you sort of learn how or in what environment or what variables need to be in the right place for you to enter the flow state. And we'll talk about those variables and how we personally get into the flow state a little later in the episode.
Right. Yeah. I mean, 1 hour of work is not created equal. Like I can sit here for an hour, and for like half of that hour, I can be playing on my phone, playing video games and talking to my friends. And then for the other half of the hour, I can be like doing the work, but not really like investing myself in the work. Whereas someone else can take that exact same hour and just accomplish 10 times more than I can. And
right.
Yeah, and that's something and obviously one of the tools that you can use in order to accomplish that is the flow state, right? If that person's in the flow state in that hour, they are getting just so much more done than you because they're uninterrupted. They're just in this state where it's like, I'm just getting this done. And they don't even have to think about it. I think if you even have to think about the fact that you're in a flow state, you're not in a flow state, which is kind of counterintuitive, right? Because you don't realize it until after you're done. And that's something you should get used to. I think the more you do it, I would say the easier it gets. I know when I was in high school, there was one break where I can remember I was getting really good at the flow state. That's because our Algebra 2 trig teacher assigned basically like homework that would take 2 weeks, basically. He just assigned like 8 assignments and I split it up, so that I could have all my like non-holidays days filled up with the homework. And so I'd finish like one section a day. And at first it was really hard. At first I was in a Skype call with like my friends, and I was just talking to them while I was doing it. And it took me 6 hours to finish one assignment that a normal school day probably would have taken me 1 hour. And that goes, I guess, back to the point of pressure, right? I wasn't under pressure to finish that or anything. But it's also the fact that I had a lot of distractions in my way and I wasn't really in the flow state. But then after a while, I started getting used to it. I was like, okay, talking to my friends is really distracting me because, it's like they're playing video games and I just really want to play those video games, and I'm so distracted by it that I can't even focus, and they're just talking about it. And so it just kept distracting me. And I realized that. So after like the first 2-3 days, I dropped that. And then I was realizing like, dang, my house is really loud. Like, even though I wasn't talking to my friends, I was still really distracted just by the surrounding environment. So I had to go and find a separate room to study in, and it ended up being my dad's study, right? After that, I was like, okay, it's nice and calm and quiet, but now there's something missing, right? Like, it's so quiet to the point where I can't even focus anymore. It's like really, really difficult to focus. And so what I started doing is I turned on like a Pentatonix Christmas playlist. And I think it just released that year, and I was like really excited to listen to it. And I realized like while I was listening to that playlist, I got so much work done. And I know you listen to a lot of Christmas music too, right?
I think I can say without a shadow of a doubt that the only Christmas music I listen to is from Pentatonics.
Pentatonics, yeah. No, I loved it. I was just playing the same album on repeat, and I think for one that helped me because I was able to have like some nice noise. Like, don't turn up the music too loud, but I turned it up to like a fairly decent level, and I was just listening to that while I was doing my homework. And then after a while, like after I listened to the song so much, it helped me even more because I was already familiar to the tune and I was focusing more on the homework itself. But the music helped kind of like drown out the silence in the room, if that made any sense, right? Because I feel like silence a lot of the time is actually more distracting than noise. Really interesting. I know it works different for everybody, but that's one of the things that I found to work for me. So to find your flow state, I think it's different for everybody, but I think it's a matter of trying to do the same thing like every day and then finding out the little adjustments that you can make, because even the smallest adjustments can really help you get into that flow state. And that's what it was for me. I was able to get all that homework done really quickly after that. Like I was only spending an hour and then I could go have fun, play video games with my friends, by just like turning on the music, just hitting the homework and not taking like any breaks at all. But obviously flow state is different for everybody. So
right.
well,
yeah.
Like what's one experience that you've had, Julian, with flow state, and what little things would you say help contribute to your flow state?
I think that you're right in saying that it's different for everybody. The variables that you need to tweak are different by the individual. For me, I guess similarly to you, how you needed to go to your dad's study in order to get focused. For me, it's I need a mental separation between my living space and my working space. And I have gone through many lengths to make that separation very, very distinct. I mean, I've lived in a bunch of apartments at this point. Like I lived in like a very small, almost like a studio apartment where it was like everything was like one room, right? So my living space was mixed with my workspace, and so like my desk was in the living room, which was right next to the couch, and I didn't have a TV at that time, so I would be watching shows on my computer screen, which happens to be sitting on my work desk. I would be playing games on my work desk. I would be cooking in the kitchen, and then my work desk would be right next to the kitchen and such like. And then when I upgraded to like a bigger 1-bedroom apartment, that was a little better. I had a bedroom that was separate. My couch was facing the TV, and my work desk was facing away from the TV. They were still in the same room, the living room and my workspace, but facing the wall was an important distinction. And at that point, I think I definitely am. This is like really bougie and really, really privileged, what I'm about to say, but I have two computers. One that I use primarily for my work and my schooling, and then I have a Windows PC that I use exclusively for like games, because I cannot for the life of me set up my Windows computer such that I have the same exact tools and the same exact workflows as my Mac to be able to get the same work done. Like I can't do it on the Windows computer, but I have a Windows computer nonetheless, so I use that to play games. So even though I'm sitting on the same desk, I still have two separate environments for playing and working. And then around this time in university, where I upgraded to like my bigger 1-bedroom apartment, was when I also acquired a standing desk. And I didn't have that before. And so then I got into this really interesting habit that I keep up to this day. At work, because I have a standing desk at work now too, and then I also still have the one that I got from university that I'm using right now, actually. I sit when I'm playing and relaxing and living, and then I stand when I'm working. So the desk is always in standing mode when I'm working. And like, you ask anybody in my office, I am always standing in my office, because standing is working. Like standing in my mind is synonymous with working. So I'm always standing when I'm working, and at work I always have my desk up in standing mode, and when I leave for the day I put it back out into sitting mode and I just leave. Like I literally never sit at work. I'm always standing. And here at home, when I'm like playing video games on my computer, which is rare because I literally don't have time anymore. Like I'm working and I have school and I have this and all that stuff. I literally don't have time for that anymore. So I don't sit very often in my office. I'm almost always standing in my office. So that was, a big overview on the lengths I've taken to really mentally separate work from life. And that's important because some people, it might take less to make that mental separation. For other people, it might take more mental separation in order to sort of coax yourself into the flow state, right? I read in a book somewhere, I don't know if it was Deep Work or another book, another productivity book, but it was a story of an individual where it was as simple as turning on a lamp. Like turning on a lamp on that person's desk meant working, and then turning it off meant you were relaxing, you were living, you were playing games, or you were not doing work. And that was enough for this individual. That was enough of a mental separation between work and play. I can't do that. Like a light is a light for me. So I need to be like in a separate space, like a different room. And that's the reason why I have a 2-bedroom apartment now. And I don't sleep in both bedrooms. I use one bedroom as an office. It's a dedicated workspace in my apartment because it's important to me that I have a separate space for my work. And then the rest of my apartment is for living and play. So those are the lengths that I've taken to get into the flow state. And I would say that it's very beneficial to make that mental separation. It's easy to divide your life into those two parts. I mean, obviously they blend, like that's undeniable and that's unavoidable. But I think separating it, at least mentally, in this way, where it's easy and very clear and very obvious that, oh, here is where I'm working, and then here is where I'm living, that helps a lot when you're trying to get into the flow state.
Right. I mean, I can definitely like agree with you with that spacing. Like I said, yeah, moving up to my dad's study helped me a lot. But aside from that, like a lot of the times when I'm like at my home computer, I also get very distracted, especially with like social media, because everything's on my desktop computer, right? So like, so I can just like, go on Facebook and play like a game whenever I want to. I don't have that problem anymore because now I also kind of have the same distinction you make. Like we're speaking like very privileged people here. I have a Mac and I have a laptop, and I kind of mix between the two, but like the Mac is exclusively for work, 100% for work. I don't have anything else on there besides work. And then the Windows is kind of a little mixture of both, and that's just because of like certain programs like that I need to run on Windows that are more convenient. But like I've made that distinction as well. And I think the spatial separation you were talking about is really important. I know that whenever I try to get work done on my bed, which I haven't tried in a very long time, and I doubt I ever will again. I tried to do that in high school. Yeah, I tried to work on my bed. I had my laptop on my lap and my notebook, and I always fell asleep. I always fell asleep. Like it was just natural. And that's just because I really associate my bed with sleeping. So I even like nowadays when I'm on my like bed playing on my phone or something, I get like pretty tired, and I don't want to do anything at all. So that's something that you have to look out for. A lot of people fall into that kind of bed trap. They're like, oh, but it's so comfortable here, and I want to be comfortable when I do my work. But sometimes you can be too comfortable. Just there is such thing as too much comfort. So, make sure to make that distinction. Mm-hmm.
I think that, I mean, you're right. First of all, like working on your bed is not something that I can recommend to anybody. However, this appears to, from personal experience, this appears to like affect different people very, very differently to different degrees. So some people might be wholly inefficient on the bed, like working on the bed, like they just fall asleep instantly. which is me. Like I start yawning like 5 minutes in, no matter how interesting
Yeah.
the work is. I start yawning 5 minutes in. But other people, they seem to be able to get in some work at least before they start getting exhausted, which isn't the point. Like it's bad overall, but I realize that we're talking about like the flow state for work, right? But we're also talking about the separation between work and play. And so I think it's important to mention that you can actually turn your bed into a space where you're not sleeping. And I'm, of course, talking about looking at your phone when you wake up or when you go to bed. I have known people who the first thing they do when they wake up in the morning, and I deal with this too, actually. Like, so I'm not sitting on a high horse saying like, like people who look at their phones in the morning are bad, because I do this too, and it's an issue that I'm working on. When you wake up in the morning and you look at your phone, and then you scroll through social media for like a good like hour or two, and you realize, oh my God, I woke up at 6, but I didn't get out of bed until 8. Like that's bad. Yeah. Because then your bed turns into an area where you look at social media and not where you just sleep.
Right.
Right. And then at night, it's like, oh, I went to bed at 10, but I went to sleep at 2. So like your bed becomes not necessarily a workspace, but it becomes a space where you scroll through social media instead of a place where you just rest. And that's bad. You don't want to have that happen. Like, I know this is a podcast about like work, but like, don't let that happen, because that's really bad. Because then you just lose hours in your day to social media, because you just scroll through it mindlessly in bed, because it's just a comfortable place to scroll through social media, and that's dangerous. That's bad for anybody's productivity.
I definitely have that problem too. No, I have that. I don't like, it's not hours obviously, like. But I do spend my fair time on my bed scrolling through social media. That's definitely a problem. Going back to your point about that whole lamp thing, I noticed something really interesting. Something that works for me is actually having a drink. And I'm talking about specifically coffee, but sometimes it's something like perhaps Red Bull, which is actually really not good for you. I'm not advocating for Red Bull or anything, but I found that it works for me. Sometimes I like an energy drink or coffee. And sometimes it's just something like something really, bless you.
Thank you.
Something really simple like sparkling water, or it's a very specific drink. So like just tea or something. But you have to establish something. And for me, like whenever I have that, I feel like I need to work. And I can't really explain why. Like maybe it's a representation of like, oh, like I'm working really hard, like I need a drink or something. But I find it to work for me. I know a lot of people do that little coffee thing. Some people will just not work until they have their cup of coffee. I'm sure you can relate to that.
Oh my God. You know what's weird is that when I'm drinking coffee, it's like a fact of life for me. Cause I make this joke to everybody I meet. Everybody I meet. It's like I get 90% of my hydration from coffee and tea, which is probably true. And I will admit that's not the healthiest habit ever. And I'm not gonna justify myself to anybody. This is an addiction that I will nurture because it is dear to me. But however, I will say this: when I start working, I feel like I need to drink coffee first. However, when I drink coffee, I don't feel like I need to work. It doesn't work both ways. It works one way. When I start working, I need coffee. Or at least I need to have had a coffee at some point during the day in order to start working, especially in the morning. So I will not be able to work in the morning unless I've had coffee. And I mean, I realize that I'm working right now, and like when I study, like I'm obviously not gonna have coffee at like 7 p.m. at night, because that means I'm never gonna go to sleep. But I just need to have had coffee in the day for me to get started on any sort of work. So it doesn't work the other way around, because I drink coffee in the weekends and sometimes I don't work on the weekends. It just depends on how I'm feeling, right? But drinking coffee doesn't spark me to start working. But starting to work, like when I sit down on my desk and I realize I haven't had a coffee yet, I'm like, I feel like having a coffee right now, and I go out and I make a coffee. So
Oh wow,
that's an interesting
that's
tidbit.
really interesting. Yeah, I know it is interesting, and I guess that goes back to the point of like everybody's workflow is really different. I rarely have coffee. Maybe that's why. Like I don't like coffee that much. So when I do have coffee in the rare moments, like I find that it boosts my productivity a lot. And I think it's something that you have to save. I guess because once you do it too much, I think the effect wears off. But obviously, it's different for everybody.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that caffeine is a drug, right? So you have to
Yes, it is a drug.
you have to think about it sort of in the mindset of a drug, in that the effects are only beneficial the first time you have it,
Right.
and then the subsequent cups of coffee that you have are not going, you're going to start getting diminishing returns. Like you're not going to stay as energized the more cups of coffee that you have. You're going to stay awake, but that doesn't mean you're going to have more concentration just because you're awake. So that being said, I am a big advocate of not drinking coffee on your commute. You only take the first swig of your coffee when you're at your desk. I guess in the sense of like work. I guess because I'm thinking about work because I'm an employee now. So I bring coffee in my car because I need coffee at work, and the coffee that is the coffee in the break room at my office is jet fuel. I can't drink that. So I make coffee at home and then I bring it to the office and I have that. So I don't drink it in the car, even though every fiber in my body tells me to take a swig of the coffee in the car because that's what I want. I don't drink it until I sit down at my desk. And then, I mean, after that, it's like I just drink the coffee. And the reason why I do that is because the benefits are given to you your first time, at least
Right.
of the day. So that's when you gain like the most benefits of coffee, the caffeine, the wakefulness, the concentration. And then the subsequent cups are like, meh, like they're nice to have. They'll keep me awake, but they're not as, satisfying, right? The satisfaction of having a cup of coffee has diminished at that point. So at school, I wouldn't recommend drinking coffee on the way to school. I would, however, recommend drinking coffee when you get into class. You take that first swig. That's where you're going to get the most benefit, I would say. So you waste your concentration on the road if you drink coffee the first thing in the morning on your commute. So that's just one tidbit that I have about coffee. If you want to drink coffee more efficiently, that works for you. That's the advice that I have.
All right, and I honestly think the adrenaline, this is kind of off topic, but I honestly think the adrenaline of not wanting to get hit by another car is kind of enough to keep you energized while you're on the road.
Yeah, that's true. But the adrenaline
Yeah.
only kicks in when you have a close call, right?
Right, definitely, yeah. That's like, I'm not advocating for you to drive when you're really sleepy, but that's why you should get 8 hours of sleep
Yes.
every night. Yeah.
Yes. Being drowsy on the road is equivalent to drunk driving. Like if
Yep.
you ever wonder, if you don't drink and you wonder what drunk driving is like, that's what it feels like when you're driving and you're absolutely exhausted and you're falling asleep at the wheel. That's exactly what that feels like.
Yeah.
Reportedly, because I don't drink, but that honestly is I feel like is accurate. Like I have not fallen asleep, but I have dozed off on the road before, and like luckily it was like a long distance drive, so like everybody was on the freeway anyway. And then in LA, going home is really boring because all the cars are driving really, really slow. So the accidents aren't like massive. If I were to get into an accident, it wouldn't be like disaster. It would probably be a fender bender, but still, like I've dozed off on the road before, and I think that is akin to drunk driving. Not fun.
And last point I want to make about workflow, which I found is really interesting. I found that when I'm forced to stay in a place and I don't have anything else to do besides work, I actually get a lot of work done. And let me give an example of this. So when I was going to UC Irvine over the break with one of my friends, because I didn't have I didn't have anything to do besides that, and I wanted to get some work out of the way. So I was just staying there with her, and it was really interesting because what happened was, like, she'd be gone for a lecture or something, and I wouldn't want to go to the lecture, and I had nothing else to do, right? So I was just sitting outside of the lecture hall. I was like, maybe I should just do some physics. And I was doing it, and I was like really, really getting the work done because I literally had nothing else to do. And that was the case for like the majority of the day, I'd say. And I got so much reading done over the break. It was incredible. And I've had incidents like that where I was like, it was like raining really hard outside, and so I was kind of stuck in the school library, and I didn't want to leave that. So I was just staying there, and I was just finding as much stuff as I could do, and I was just knocking it out like assignment by assignment, and I was just finishing it really quickly. So that's really interesting. I guess like when you're stranded in a situation and you don't really have anything else to do, I think that's personally when I become really productive. I don't know if that's been the case for you at all, but I know with me and some of my friends that has been the case, because I know like some of the PhD students, some of the master students, like they live off campus, and so they have to stay on campus the entire time. So during those gaps, between classes, that's when they say they get a lot of their work done. Just like going into the student lounge and just finishing up that work. I don't know if that's the same
part
for you,
of that.
Julian.
Yeah, you know what? I think part of that is the reduction of distraction, right? Because when you're at home, you're in your living space, right? Your life, your relaxation, your de-stressors are all there. There's TV, there's games, there's the ability to scroll through social media without anybody judging you, right? Assuming that you live alone or with very few people. All of your de-stressors are there. And then when you're at a place where everybody else is working, you don't feel inclined to play because you're going to be judged for playing where everybody else is working. But also it's because you have overall less distractions, right? You don't have TVs, right. You don't have games. Nothing's stopping you from playing games on your laptop, but go ahead and try to like sit next to somebody in like the study tables and start playing a video game. You're going to get looks because everybody in the library is working, is studying, right? And so then when you're playing games in an area where somebody's studying, it's like, what are you doing, man? And then it's even worse when it's like midterms or final season, and then you're playing games. You're definitely gonna get looks because you're gonna be like, wow, you must be either very confident in your abilities to pass your exams stellarly, or you've really given up. Like you're just really not trying at that point.
No, I just want to comment on that real quick. No, that's definitely something, especially when, like, I know a lot of people have, like, these study rooms, these private study rooms at my school, and you can, like, rent them out for, like, an hour or 2 hours. And sometimes, oh my God, me and my friends judge those people when they're staying in there and they're just talking to each other or playing games or something, and they're not getting work done. We really judge them. They're see-through rooms. And so we just look at them. We're like, oh my God, like you rented out a room and you took up someone else's space when they could have been actually studying and being productive because maybe they need that space. And you're just taking that up. You're a horrible, horrible person. Oh my God, those people are the worst. Or like a room where all the seats are taken up and you just need a place to study, and you see someone in there slacking. That is the worst. You will get looks. Like you said, you will get looks. It's terrible.
Yeah. And it does. And sometimes you don't notice it, but like once you do notice it, it's like, oh my God, everybody's looking at me. And so don't do it. It's not a good idea to be like playing and fooling around when you're in the library. I guess at a cafe, it's more acceptable because I don't think anybody cares when you're at a cafe, but at the library, I think it's like a place that you're supposed to work and focus, right? And people are giving you looks not because it's like, well, I guess some people give you looks because it's, it looks bad on you, but also people give you looks because it's distracting. Because some people deal with video game addiction, and when you're playing video games in the library, some people are there to avoid playing video games, and when you're playing video games in front of them, that doesn't really help. So you shouldn't do that. That's just not a good thing. That's not a nice thing when you go to a university library or really any library at all and you're playing games, So don't do that. But I think the overall point is that you go to these places that are not your home as a spatial separation, like a mental separation from work and play, right? Because you work on campus or you work at the library and you play when you're at home. So you go to these other places and that can give you a lot of focus. I remember when I was a senior in high school and I was doing like a bunch of AP classes, I would routinely go to Starbucks on the weekends with my laptop that was far too weak to play any video games. Actually, you know what? What's funny is that I actually installed Linux, like Ubuntu Linux, on my laptop. So I literally could not play games even if I wanted to, really, on my laptop. And so then I would bring that laptop to Starbucks and then I would just do work there at Starbucks. I mean, I had coffee, exactly what I need. And then I had my laptop, which couldn't play any games. And then I would just work there instead of staying at home. And that allowed me to get a lot of work done in my AP classes. And so the spatial separation, working with other people who are also working and eliminating distractions are like the best ways of coaxing yourself into the flow state, I feel.
Right, definitely. So just to recap, like a few points that we mentioned in the episode, make sure that you have spatial separation. I know for me, there were little things that help, like I guess audio separation is what I would call it. Just listening to music and getting into that kind of rhythm, and then eliminating any distractions. Yeah.
On that note of music, I find that music with no vocals is super helpful. So
interesting.
Yeah. So like the Pentatonics, like Christmas music, like I live for, but I find myself singing along with them or like interpreting the lyrics in my head as I hear them. And that's a bad thing because I'm usually reading or studying something, right? So music without vocals is just the music and I'm no longer trying to interpret the lyrics anymore. And that allows me to just listen to the music or like allow the music to sort of drain out everything else. And then focus on whatever I'm reading. Sorry, I interrupted, but like that's one thing that I wanted to throw in there is music without vocals.
Right, no, that definitely works for me too. I actually have a classical music playlist, and that works really well for me too. But I think if you listen to a song with vocals enough and you kind of just like don't think about the vocals anymore, I think that's okay.
Right,
but obviously that takes time to get adjusted to, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
when you listen to a song like on repeat endlessly, yeah, that works.
Right. Yeah. No, that's what I actually did throughout high school, and it worked for me. I still do it sometimes. And yeah, just make sure like you do something that's familiar, because if you're listening to music that you actually have to think about, that will cause a whole new distraction, which is what you don't want.
Oh, that's true. That's a good point. Listening to music that you've listened to before allows you to not think about the music. When you're listening to music that's like new to your ears, you sort of like, oh, that's interesting. I actually kind of like that. And you start thinking about the music, even if it doesn't have vocals, you start thinking about the music instead of your work. So that's actually a really, really good point. I hadn't thought of that before. And now I'm only noticing that it's an issue. I need to figure out what pieces I've listened to before and then put that in a list. And then I should listen to that on repeat instead of listening to a playlist that's constantly being updated with new stuff.
Oh yeah, it definitely works for me. I have a playlist that's literally just songs that I've listened to at least like 4 or 5 times. I'm like, okay, I like this song, and I'll just put it in, and then I won't have to think about it because it's like, oh, well, I've listened to that song before. Works for me. Like I said, it might not work for you, but that's what works for me, and I find it to be really valuable.
Good tip.
Yeah, but aside from that, like we said, space, audio, and these little things, for some people it could be a lamp. For me, it's just grabbing a drink, and for some other people, it might be something else. But I
need a whole other room.
Right? Yeah. No. I just think it's just small or maybe big adjustments, right? Just doing the same thing over and over until you find out what works for you, and then adapting that, every day of your life, and then I think that's the best way to really get into the flow of work and to really get a lot of work done really efficiently. Okay, so thank you for listening to the Study Space podcast. We know that there are countless podcasts being published every day, and you have decided to listen to ours in particular. It really means a lot to us that you've given your time to listen to 2 students ramble on about school. The show notes with links and everything we mentioned in the episode for further reading and learning are on our website at uniplan.dev. If you want to show support, share the podcast or tell a friend about it. Your testimonial to your friends and family is the most helpful thing that you can do for us. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. That's it for this episode, and we will see you next time on the Study Space podcast.